They say that when tragedy strikes, your real family shows themselves. I used to think that was a comforting idea until I found out what it really meant. My name is Caleb, and 5 years ago, the people I loved most made a choice that shattered everything I believed about blood, loyalty, and love. This is the story of how I lost everything, found something greater, and then watched the past come crawling back to me, begging for forgiveness. I'm 35 now, living in Sacramento, California. I run a modest but growing landscape architecture firm. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I built it from scratch after years of scraping through freelance jobs and working under egotistical bosses who thought creativity came second to speed. I've never been wealthy, but I've always managed to take care of my wife, Marissa, and our son, Noah. He's 10 now, bright, curious, and everything I could ever hope for in a kid. My wife works as a pediatric physical therapist. Between her job and mine, we manage well enough. We weren't the kind of people who took vacations every summer or leased new cars every few years, but we had what mattered: stability, joy, and each other. Until the day Noah collapsed on our living room floor, clutching his stomach and gasping for air, everything felt manageable. That night is burned into my memory. It was a Saturday. I was in the backyard, trying to prune a stubborn orange tree that refused to bloom. Marissa was inside with Noah, helping him with a school project. I heard the scream and dropped my shears. When I ran in, Noah was curled on the rug, his face pale and his small frame trembling like he was freezing, though it was warm outside. We rushed him to the ER. The nurse didn't waste a second, rushing him into triage. Hours blurred together, the smell of antiseptic and the soft beeping of machines keeping me tethered to reality. Finally, a young doctor with tired eyes pulled us into a quiet room. I knew then, before he even said a word, that things would never be the same again. It's a rare autoimmune condition, he explained gently, pointing to Noah's swollen organs on a scan. His immune system is attacking his liver. We've seen it before. It's treatable, but the treatment is expensive and not covered by most basic insurance plans. I remember Marissa asking the question I couldn't. How much? About $160,000 for the full course of treatment and post-care monitoring. We need to start within the next few days, or... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We left that office hollowed out, with a single phrase running through my head like a looped recording. We need to start within the next few days. We didn't have $160,000. Not even close. Between my business and Marissa's salary, our combined savings barely touched $12,000. We'd always been careful, yes, but we'd also always assumed there'd be time. Time to grow. Time to prepare. Time to ensure ourselves better. Now, time was something we were running out of. I spent that night lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling while Marissa sobbed quietly in the next room. Noah was asleep in the hospital under careful watch, too weak to even open his eyes. I had never felt so powerless. And then, as dawn crept in and the world outside began to move again, I thought of my family. My parents, Stephen and Diane, had never been the warmest people. They owned a boutique wine label in Napa Valley, Sterling and Rose, and carried themselves like royalty at small-town charity events and country club parties. They weren't billionaires, but they were rich in the kind of way that allowed them to ignore price tags, fly first class, and donate enough to have their names on plaques. My sister Harper was 6 years younger than me and their golden child. Even when she flunked out of her first year at college, they threw her a mental wellness sabbatical party. When I graduated with honors, they sent a congratulatory card with no check. I hadn't asked them for anything since I was 23. But that morning, I made the call. Harper answered. Her voice was sleepy, slightly irritated. Caleb? You okay? Is Mom up? What's going on? It's 6 in the morning. I need to talk to her. It's about Noah. Please. There was a pause. Hang on. A minute later, my mother's voice filtered through the phone, calm and clipped. Caleb, what's wrong? I explained everything. Noah's diagnosis, the urgency, the cost. I didn't cry. I kept my voice level. I told her how much we needed and how fast we had to get it. I told her this wasn't just some crisis. This was life or death. She sighed softly at the end. Caleb, you know we're right in the middle of planning Harper's wedding. The caterers, the vineyard lease. We've already committed to everything. I blinked. What? Her tone didn't change. It's not a good time, sweetie. We've already allocated over $200,000 to Harper's wedding and honeymoon. We can't just undo all that. My grip on the phone tightened. You're spending $200,000 on a wedding. And you're telling me there's no room left to help save your grandson's life. There's more at play here than just the money, she said coolly. There's timing. There's commitments. We have reputations. I hung up. Marissa was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked at me, eyes full of hope. I didn't have to say anything. My face said it all. I sat down, numb, while she wrapped her arms around me and just held me. For hours, we didn't move. And when the sun fully rose and the world insisted we keep going, I forced myself to stand. We would find another way. But what I didn't know then was that betrayal wasn't done with me. Because Harper, my own sister, was about to twist the knife even deeper, in a way I never saw coming. The day after my parents turned us down, Harper showed up at the hospital. I wasn't expecting her. I hadn't heard from her since she posted some engagement pictures online 6 months ago, her holding up her hand while her fiancé Chase grinned in the background, the Napa sunset behind them glowing like a magazine ad. We hadn't been close in years. Still, when I saw her step into the corridor in her designer coat and oversized sunglasses, I let myself hope, just a little. "Caleb," she said softly, reaching out as if to hug me. I didn't move. She dropped her arms. "I heard about Noah. I wanted to come see him." I stared at her. "Did Mom send you?" "No," she said quickly. "I came on my own." She peered through the small window into Noah's room. His little frame looked so small under the hospital blankets, tubes and sensors running from his arms like roots. "How bad is it?" she asked. I told her. I even repeated the number, $160,000, and how we had maybe days to get it together before things became irreversible. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You could say you'll help," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from boiling over. "You could say you'll postpone your wedding and ask Mom and Dad to help me instead of blowing all that money on a 5-hour party." Her jaw tightened. "It's not just a party, Caleb." I laughed. It came out hollow. "Right. It's a statement, isn't it? About love and legacy and whatever else people say to justify going bankrupt over flower arrangements." She bristled. "I came to show support, not be insulted. Support doesn't mean anything if it isn't real. You want to help? Help. Otherwise, don't pretend like you're here for moral comfort." She stared at me for a long time, eyes unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked down the corridor. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The next morning, I got a call from a friend, Jake, who worked part-time doing deliveries for my parents' winery. "Hey, man," he said. "Didn't know you were back in touch with your folks." "I'm not." He paused. "Well, Harper was at a local vendor event yesterday with Chase. She was talking to a few people I know. Said you were using Noah's condition to guilt them into canceling the wedding." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. "What?" Jake lowered his voice. "She said you were being dramatic. That you were trying to emotionally blackmail the family into giving you money. Said you exaggerated the situation to make them look bad." The walls around me pulsed, like my brain couldn't contain the pressure building inside it. "She said that to people? I thought you should know." I hung up and sat in the hospital cafeteria, stunned. This wasn't just betrayal. This was character assassination. Marissa came to find me 20 minutes later. "Noah's asking for you," she said softly. I nodded but couldn't move. "Not yet. I just talked to the billing coordinator," she said gently. "We need to submit a payment plan by Friday. They might let us start if we have enough of a down payment." "How much?" I asked. 60,000. We had 12. I looked up at her. "We're going to lose him." She shook her head fiercely. "No, we're not. But we need to do something, Caleb. Fast." That night, I posted a simple message on social media. I didn't mention Harper. I didn't call out my parents. I just said what was true. Our son was dying. The treatment was expensive, and we were asking for help from anyone willing to give. What happened next? I didn't expect. Within 24 hours, friends started sharing the post. Then old coworkers. Then clients. I got messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. A former teacher donated $1,000. A woman from church set up a community raffle. Marissa's coworkers pulled $3,200 from their own pockets. Then came the biggest surprise. Late one night, I got a message from Darren Lister, a client I'd done a backyard remodel for 2 years earlier. He was a retired contractor, gruff and notoriously private. We hadn't spoken in ages. The message said, "Saw the post. Not much for charity, but I remember how you busted your ass on my project even when it rained 3 days straight. You're a good man. I'll cover the gap. No strings. Just make sure your boy pulls through." Attached was a digital confirmation of a wire transfer. $45,000. I stared at it for minutes, unable to breathe. Between the donations, the raffles, and Darren's gift, we hit the goal in 2 days. When we walked into the hospital administrator's office and handed over the full down payment, the staff immediately began prepping for Noah's treatment. I remember holding Marissa's hand as she wept in relief. I hadn't slept in 3 days, but in that moment, I felt alive again. Noah's first round of treatment began that evening. I stayed by his bed, whispering stories, singing old lullabies, and watching the color slowly return to his face. But even as I began to hope, something still burned inside me, a cold fury that refused to die. Not just at my parents. At Harper. Because she hadn't just turned her back on us. She tried to convince the world that I was the villain, that I was selfish, manipulative, desperate for attention. She didn't expect the community to show up. She thought her word would be law, like it always had been in our family. And when her narrative crumbled, I expected her to hide in embarrassment. But what she did instead, that would become the second twist I never saw coming. Because just when Noah's condition started to improve, Harper made a call of her own, to a lawyer. And what she tried to do next, it nearly destroyed everything again. 2 weeks into Noah's treatment, just when we were beginning to breathe again, a formal letter arrived at our apartment. It came by courier, sealed in a stiff envelope with embossed lettering. I opened it at the kitchen table, and as I read, my stomach dropped. It was a cease and desist order from Harper's attorney. The document accused me of defamation, citing public damage to her personal and professional reputation stemming from the social media fundraiser. It claimed that I had manipulated public opinion through suggestive language, that my omissions of context had incited harassment, and that unless I issued a formal public apology and removed all fundraising posts within 72 hours, legal action would be pursued. I couldn't believe it. She was suing me for saving my son's life. I handed the letter to Marissa, who read it twice and sat down in silence, pale and shaking. Then, quietly, she whispered, "She's afraid." Afraid because people didn't believe her version of the story. It wasn't just fear, it was damage control. I didn't name Harper in the post. I didn't even mention my parents. But the truth has a way of rising, and people saw through the lines. Enough mutual acquaintances connected the dots, and Harper, always so careful about her public image, realized too late that people saw who she really was. And now, instead of owning it, she was trying to bury it, with lawyers. I didn't have time for a lawsuit. Noah had 2 more treatment cycles to go. My days were spent working double hours to keep the business afloat and my nights sleeping in a hospital chair. I was exhausted, emotionally raw, and barely holding it together. But something deeper inside me lit up that night, something sharper than rage. I wasn't going to roll over. Not for her. I contacted a legal acquaintance, Sam, someone I'd worked with during a property dispute a few years ago. He was shrewd, quiet, and fiercely loyal. When I showed him the letter, he raised an eyebrow. "She has nothing," he said, flipping through the pages. "Defamation? You didn't name her. You didn't imply anything actionable. This is a scare tactic. She's trying to push me into silence," I muttered. Sam leaned back in his chair. "You can ignore it. Or you can counter it." "How?" "Want to fight fire with fire." I hesitated. Every fiber of me wanted to stay focused on Noah. But a part of me, one that remembered every backhanded remark, every smug smile Harper gave while I scraped to survive, wanted justice. Real, public, sharp justice. "Let's counter," I said. Sam helped me draft a public clarification, an elegant, carefully worded statement that reaffirmed the fundraiser's purpose and truth. It didn't name names, but emphasized that no member of our immediate family provided assistance, and that any narratives contradicting this fact are categorically false and harmful. Then Sam filed a preemptive response, detailing the defamation threats as retaliatory intimidation. It never went to court, but it didn't need to. The response became public record, and local media picked up the story. Fundraiser father faces legal threat after family refuses help for dying child. People were furious. The online support swelled again. Thousands shared Noah's recovery updates. Former clients of Harper's design consultancy started leaving reviews that questioned her integrity. Wedding vendors canceled contracts. Her fiancé, Chase, publicly humiliated and dragged through comment threads, pulled out of the engagement entirely. And then Harper did the unthinkable. She called me. It was just after midnight. I was walking a hallway in the hospital to clear my head when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me it was her. I picked up. Her voice was small. "Hello, Caleb." I waited. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I laughed, quietly. Didn't mean to destroy my name? Sue me during my son's chemo? Or tell people I was lying to get sympathy money? I panicked. "No. You calculated," I snapped. "You thought your reputation was more valuable than my son's life." She sniffled on the other end. Chase left. "Mom and Dad are furious. They said you've ruined us." "Ruined you?" I nearly shouted. "You did that all by yourself, Harper?" "I didn't know it was that serious," she whispered. "I didn't think he'd actually die." I stopped walking. "He's 10, and you bet on the chance that he might survive without help." "That's what you're saying." Silence stretched. "I'm sorry," she murmured. But I didn't respond. I just hung up. That night, as I stood watching Noah sleep, his chest rising slowly, the monitors finally slowing to calm rhythms, I made myself a promise. I would never let my family hurt us again. Not through words. Not through silence. Not through manipulation disguised as love. And when Noah was finally released from the hospital 3 weeks later, we didn't go home. We moved. I took everything I had, the business, our savings, the goodwill of people who had stood by us, and I started fresh. New town. New school for Noah. New clinic for Marissa. I opened a second branch of my firm in Sonoma. Smaller, scrappier, but filled with people who cared. No forwarding address for my parents. No wedding invite for Harper, if there ever would be one again. We were gone. For 3 years, we lived quietly. Noah got better, stronger, healthier, louder. He joined a robotics club, won a county science fair. I couldn't look at him without seeing the miracle of second chances. But just when I thought the past was buried, it came back. Uninvited. Unwelcome. And this time, it was carrying its own desperate plea. It started with a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual letter, handwritten, scrawled in a shaky cursive I hadn't seen in years. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother. It arrived on a cold Tuesday morning, tucked between a plumbing invoice and a flyer for a local dentist. I almost tossed it aside, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page. "Caleb, please, if you're reading this, don't throw it away yet. We're in trouble. Your father, he made some bad decisions. We invested in a friend's startup, and then the vineyard collapsed. Chase sued for breach of contract. Harper's drowning in debt. Everything's gone. We've lost the house. I know you probably hate us. I wouldn't blame you. But we're not asking for a handout. Just a little help to get back on our feet. We're living out of a motel. It's humiliating. Your father won't write to you himself. He's too proud. But I'm begging you. Please don't let us disappear." It was signed with one word. Mom. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down. And I didn't touch it again for 2 weeks. I didn't tell Marissa. I didn't mention it to Noah. Every night, I'd pass by the drawer where I'd stuffed it and feel that familiar pressure in my chest, anger and confusion tangled together like wires sparking in the dark. I should have felt triumph. They had shunned me when I needed them most. Now they needed me. But there was no victory in it. Only fatigue. And that fatigue turned to a deeper kind of ache when I got a call from an unknown number late one Friday night. A man's voice this time. Rougher. Quieter. "Caleb," he said. "It's your father." It was like hearing a ghost. My body tensed. I said nothing. "I don't expect you to forgive us. I know what we did. A pause. Your mother's sick. She hasn't told you that, has she?" My silence answered for me. "Stage 2 lymphoma," he said. "We caught it late. She's trying to stay strong. But the treatments," his voice broke, the words collapsing in on themselves. "We can't afford them." I closed my eyes. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because I don't know anyone else who'd care enough to answer." I almost hung up right then. But something in his voice, something hollow, beaten down, made me pause. I remembered standing in that hospital hallway with Noah, praying for any kind of miracle. I remembered begging this man, this same voice, to help me save my child, and being told, in so many cold, calculated words, that a wedding mattered more. "You once spent $200,000 on a party," I said. "You remember that?" "Yes. But now you want help to afford chemo. Isn't that something?" "I know," he whispered. "I know. I begged you," I said. "I knelt in front of you." Silence. I felt my hand trembling. My voice turned sharp. "You told me I was embarrassing the family. That I was dramatic. And now you want me to save you? He didn't answer. And I didn't hang up. Because as much as I wanted to walk away, a part of me, the part that had once needed him, still wanted something from this moment. Not closure. Not justice. Just truth. You lost the vineyard? I asked finally. All of it. Foreclosed. The land's being auctioned next month. And Harper? She left for the city, trying to pick up work. Last I heard, she's living in someone's guest room. Chase's lawyers are bleeding her dry. I almost laughed. So, the empire crumbled. Every brick, he said. And suddenly, I felt something I didn't expect. Pity. Not the kind that forgives. The kind that pities an animal limping alone in the dark. The kind that recognizes the tragedy of someone who built their whole identity on the illusion of control and now had nothing left. I'm not sending you money, I said flatly. I didn't ask for any. Not directly. Then what do you want? He paused. To see you. Just once. I almost said no. But before I could stop myself, the words came out. Next Friday. My office. Noon. He let out a breath. Thank you. I didn't say it was for you, I muttered, and hung up. That week passed in a blur. I told Marissa everything. She didn't tell me what to do. She just looked at me, her hand resting on my arm, and said, whatever you decide, make sure you can live with it. Noah didn't know the details. He just saw me tired again, pacing late into the night. The day came. At 11:55 a.m., I sat in my office, a tray of untouched pastries on the side table, watching the door. At 12:02, they walked in. My father had aged 10 years. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. My mother looked even worse, wrapped in a shawl, her once pristine hair dulled to a thin silver. She moved slowly, cautiously, like every step was a negotiation with gravity. They didn't sit until I motioned. I didn't smile. I have nothing to give you, I said before they could speak. My mother shook her head. We didn't come for that. Then why? To say we were wrong, she said. Her voice was trembling. About everything. You. Marissa. Noah. We were so obsessed with appearing successful, with protecting Harper's spotlight. We didn't realize we were burning our family to the ground. My father cleared his throat. We wanted to be proud of something. And when you didn't ask us for help early on, we assumed you were doing fine. That's a lie, I said calmly. I begged. They didn't deny it. And for the first time in years, I saw something in their eyes I hadn't seen since I was a child. Shame. Real, unpolished, unguarded shame. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the hills. Then I said, you'll get your help. I turned to face them. But not from me. Their eyes widened. I'll arrange a care plan through one of our pro bono clinics. We support a foundation for cancer patients. Your treatment will be covered. Quietly. Efficiently. No charity. No spotlight. Just what's needed. My mother began to cry. But after that, I continued, we are done. There will be no dinners. No holidays. No visits. You will not speak to my son. You will not involve yourself in his life. You forfeited that right the day you watched him suffer and turned away. They nodded slowly. Broken. And then I walked them out. I watched them leave the building. Fragile. Smaller somehow. And I didn't feel victorious. I just felt finished. But life, as I was about to learn, wasn't done yet. Because just when I thought everything had finally settled, Harper came back. Not to sue. Not to argue. But to confess something I never saw coming. I didn't expect to see Harper again. After everything that had happened, after the lawsuit threats, the slander, the silence, I assumed she'd fade into whatever version of her life she could salvage. I thought she'd drift back to the city, reinvent herself under a new brand, marry some clueless investor who didn't read tabloids. But then she showed up. Not at my house. Not at my office. She came to Noah's school. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was late picking him up because of a delayed meeting, and when I arrived, I saw him standing on the sidewalk, talking to someone. Her. She wore a gray trench coat and oversized sunglasses, the kind that screamed, I don't want to be seen but hope you notice me anyway. Her hair was tied back, and her makeup was minimal. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Uncertain. I parked fast and stormed toward them, already feeling the heat of protective fury rise in my throat. What the hell are you doing? I barked, positioning myself between her and Noah. Noah looked up at me, confused. Dad, she said she's your sister. I turned to him gently. Go to the car, buddy. He hesitated. Please, I said. Once he was out of earshot, I turned back to Harper. You come near him again, and I'll make sure the restraining order hits so hard it'll tattoo your front door. You understand me? She didn't flinch. She just stared at me, eyes puffy, voice hoarse. I didn't come to hurt anyone. I needed to talk to you. This isn't how you do that. I didn't think you'd see me any other way, she said quietly. I said nothing. She took a deep breath. You deserve to know the truth. I crossed my arms. That you're a liar? A coward? An opportunist? That I was pregnant, she said. My breath caught. She looked down. Back when all of it was happening, Noah's illness, the wedding planning, I found out. Chase didn't know. Neither did Mom or Dad. I was terrified. I thought if I told anyone, they'd force me to postpone everything. The wedding, the party, the image. She bit her lip. I had an abortion. Quietly. Alone. No one knew. And I hated you for making it impossible to pretend everything was perfect. My voice was ice. You hated me for trying to save my son. No, she whispered. I hated myself. But I couldn't face it. So I turned it into your fault. I stared at her. Her hands trembled. Her mascara was smudged. I wasn't just selfish, she said. I was broken. And I turned my pain into a weapon. I convinced myself you were exploiting your own tragedy so I wouldn't have to face mine. For a long moment, we stood there in silence. Wind tugged at her coat. Behind us, kids laughed on the playground, the world moving forward without pause. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said. I don't even think I deserve to be in your life. But I needed you to know the whole story. I needed you to know that my cruelty had a source, even if it doesn't excuse it. I swallowed hard, trying to control the storm inside me. You made a choice, I said. And then you buried it with another. And another. And when it all came crumbling down, you still blamed me. She nodded slowly. I know. I shook my head. You tried to rewrite the truth. And you almost convinced people. You almost buried us under your shame. I live with it every day, she murmured. I see your posts. Noah's pictures. His science trophies. I see what you saved. And I remember what I gave up. What I destroyed. For a split second, I saw the girl she used to be. The one who built blanket forts with me in the living room. Who cried when our dog ran away. Who whispered secrets under shared bed sheets during thunderstorms. But that girl was gone. And I wasn't her brother anymore. I turned to leave. Caleb, she called after me. If you ever need anything. I stopped. I won't, I said. And I walked away. When I got to the car, Noah looked up at me. Was that really your sister? Yeah, I said softly. It was. He paused. She seemed sad. She is. He tilted his head. Are you mad at her? I didn't answer for a long time. Then I said, I'm not sure what I am. Noah looked out the window, then said something that hit me harder than anything that day. I'm glad we don't need people like that. I glanced at him, his small face pressed to the glass, and felt something strange stir in my chest. Relief. Not because I had walked away, but because I had walked through. The next day, I wrote a letter of my own. Not to Harper. Not to my parents. To every donor. Every friend. Every stranger who had stepped up when we were drowning. I told them Noah was now in remission. That he was thriving. That their kindness had been the difference between a death sentence and a second chance. I included pictures. His latest science fair. Our family trip to Big Sur. Him laughing so hard at the beach he fell backward into the surf. And then I made it public. It went viral. But more importantly, it brought the right people back into our lives. Former clients. Childhood friends. A couple who had donated anonymously reached out and offered to help fund a scholarship in Noah's name for families facing similar crises. Suddenly, our story wasn't just about survival. It was about giving back. And then, just when I thought the cycle was complete, just when I believed the past had finally run out of cards to play, I got one final letter. Not from Harper. Not from my parents. From someone else entirely. And what it said, it changed everything. The envelope was plain, no return address, but it had the faint scent of lavender, something that tugged at a memory I couldn't quite place. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a photograph. The letter was handwritten in a careful, deliberate script. Caleb, you don't know me. At least, not yet. But I've followed your story for years. I was one of the early donors during Noah's fundraiser. A friend had shared your post, and something about your words, your desperation, your honesty, stopped me cold. What you didn't know was that I had just lost my own daughter. She was 6. Rare disease. Gone in under a month. We had the money. The best doctors. It didn't matter. And then I read your plea. The love in it. The terror. The clarity. You made me feel again. You reminded me that there's still something worth fighting for in this world. that the next parent might get the miracle I didn't. I've kept track of your journey. I've watched as you rebuilt, as you gave more than you ever asked for. And now, I want to do the same. I've set up a trust. In Noah's name. It will fund pediatric emergency care for uninsured children in the greater Northern California region. Quietly. No publicity. No press. Just help. It starts with $2 million. But it won't stop there. Because your story didn't just save your son. It saved me. Sincerely. A friend. Attached was a photo, her daughter, I assumed. A little girl with curly dark hair and a mischievous grin, holding a stuffed rabbit in front of a blooming cherry tree. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. Then I broke. Not the kind of broken that comes from pain, but the kind that comes from release. From knowing that something so excruciating, so isolating, had stretched its fingers across time and space and found a way to heal someone else. That night, I told Marissa everything. She held the photo gently, reverently. Noah read the letter aloud twice, then asked if we could plant a cherry tree in our backyard. So we did. And as we dug the soil and placed the sapling into the earth, I realized something I hadn't seen until that moment. The past doesn't always stay buried. But sometimes, when you least expect it, it blooms. Months passed. The foundation, Noah's fund, grew faster than we imagined. Hospitals began to call. Parents sent letters of thanks. And for every child treated, we hung a wind sheen in the cherry tree. By spring, it sounded like music whenever the wind passed through our backyard. My parents never reached out again. Harper did, once. A text. I saw what you did. It's beautiful. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. Some ghosts are better left at the edge of memory, soft, quiet, no longer threatening. One evening, Noah and I sat on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the hills. He was taller now, leaner, with eyes older than his years. Do you ever think about them? He asked, his voice low. I didn't need to ask who. Sometimes, I admitted, but not with anger. What with then? I thought for a moment. Distance. Like watching a storm move off into the ocean. You remember how bad it was, but you're not in it anymore. He nodded slowly. I'm glad we're here, he said. I smiled, pulling him close. Me too. And I meant it. Because through fire and betrayal, heartbreak and healing, we'd made something real. Not a family we were born with, but a family we chose. And in the end, that was more than enough. That was everything.